Session 1 Topic 3 SAP Architecture. So in this topic we are going to talk about SAP architecture, how it has evolved over time. I briefly touched upon in our previous session, so even in this topic I'm going to touch upon how the architecture evolved over time. Then we are going to talk about SAP S4 HANA architecture, and we'll talk about how the SAP is being deployed, on-prem deployment versus cloud deployment. We'll touch on this, and we'll also talk about the code using which the application stack is built, ABAP versus SAP. So these are the topics that we'll be covering in this session. So let's get started. Coming back to that evolution, so originally when the SAP software was built, it was built as a mono-tier or single-tier architecture, monolithic architecture. So it had all the presentation, application and business tier wrapped into one software component, and it's being used. That was in the 1970s when the SAP was originally built. From there it moved to the client server architecture, two-tier architecture. So we have broken down into two logical segments, presentation and application and database tier. So how the customers use that two-tier architecture was, if there are like multiple mainframe terminals, right? So they can connect to the terminals and access the application and that database component. So that was the second development in the architecture, the client server architecture. From there it moved to the three-tier architecture, our classic ECC solution, right? It's a three-tier architecture where they had presentation layer at the top, application tier and the database tier. So we'll talk about this. Before that, I'll talk about what is different in SAP S4 HANA. So the latest solution is the SAP S4 HANA, which is kind of the same three-tier architecture but little bit more advanced. So they have built a robust database system. Their own HANA database system has a high processing power, in-memory data grid. We'll talk about what are the uniqueness of SAP S4. Also, SAP S4 can integrate to a lot of business suites, both non-SAP as well as non-SAP system, right? In the past, SAP is being connected to a lot of non-SAP system. Now what SAP has done is they have built so many powerful business suites, that strength that gives business that extra edge to take the business to the dominant position. So that's the specialty of S4 HANA, suites for business. S4 stands for suite for business. HANA is nothing but the database. So that's the latest version of SAP. That's SAP S4 HANA. Now let's try to understand this three-tier architecture, right? So as I said, we have three tiers, and presentation tier, after the 2000 we have two types of presentation tier. We have the thick client as well as the thin client. Till date, we use both the thick and thin client. Okay, now majority of the operations are moving from thick client to thin client, so because of the ease of use. So traditionally we had the SAP thick client, and after 2000s we have this thin client. So both are being used. So thick client, the way the user access thick client is they install the SAP GUI. So it's a thick client installed on your desktop. So you open the SAP GUI, give the connection string, give your credentials, using which it connects to your application stack. Okay, so that's the SAP GUI presentation here. Then we have the browser or the web GUI. We call it as web GUI. So where you pass that endpoint in the browser, you open a browser, give the URL, and similar to SAP GUI, you have to give the password, and it's almost the same, but the way it connects to application tier is different. Pretty much it does the same job. That's the presentation tier in the SAP R3 world. Then we have the application layer. So that's application layer is nothing but all the different application servers. So we have so many different business modules, right? So all these business modules are being deployed in the application stack, which does all the logical operation. All the logic operations are being carried out by the application stack. based on the complexity of the business and the volume of transaction happens in the business, we have 1 to 10 or 20 applications. So it depends, varies from organization to organization based on the unique need. Then we have the database tier. Not traditionally, before S4 HANA database came into picture, right? The S4 was dependent on the other vendors for the database, like they use DBMS, Oracle, for managing their database operations, and they had a bit of a challenge. They couldn't effectively use the database stack. Now, because of the limitation and constraint that the vendors were having, or that particular vendor was having, now with their own in-house database, right, they were able to do a lot of modernization on the database stack. Okay, so that's about the simple high-level architecture. Okay, and now coming to the presentation tier, right? As performance tester, you should have a better understanding on what are the different presentation tier, because all your load injection will happen from the presentation tier. So SAP has SAP GUI, which I already mentioned. Then we have the web GUI, and there are also web API services using which it connects to the SAP system. For example, all the e-commerce channels, your mobile inventory application, like so many different applications, right? They don't have to use SAP GUI. They can use the API services to connect to the application layer and do the particular business operation. So basically these are the three major services. Then we have the batch jobs. I think we'll talk about that in our later sessions. So we have batch scheduler, we have a lot of other such applications which is connected to SAP. Okay, as a performance tester, you need to have a good hands-on and you need a good experience on the presentation tier. I mean, it's not a big deal. You get the KT whenever you join a project, you get the KT and you clearly document those steps, right? So as performance tester, you need to be good in the at the presentation tier. You need to understand all those business process and what are the business transactions that happens at the presentation tier. And if you want to do performance engineering, you need to understand about the application servers, database servers, what are the different key performance metrics that we can gather from the application stack, database stack, all those kind of details you need to be aware of in order to become a performance engineer in SAP. Traditionally, I think you have to do both, more of a bit of performance testing as well as bit of performance engineering in the SAP world. Okay, so now at a very high level, right, like how the architecture looks like. Then coming back to the way these applications are being deployed. So in the past, traditionally it was always on-prem deployment, right? They have this on-prem model where they have their own infrastructure on their premises, and they try to have their application, database, everything was being managed on the on-prem network. So now most of the companies are moving to cloud. Most companies are moving, even that transition is happening. So all these are being built on the cloud. SAP has its own cloud solution, SAP Cloud. We have AWS, we have GCP. So in one of those cloud provider, we can deploy this solution. Okay, so if you look at the difference between on-premise and the cloud, right, it's easy to manage. It's cloud, and in terms of control, I think pretty much on-prem and cloud has full control, at least in the SAP solution. And maintenance cost is less. And security wise, in the past, whenever companies want to move this transition from on-prem to cloud, right, they were concerned about the security. But I think now in the recent times that has been taken care, so we don't have to absolutely fear about security on the cloud-based solution. So that's about how the software is being deployed, whether on-prem or cloud. So you need some level of understanding on that as well as a performance tester and engineer. The next thing is like what is the underlying code on which your business process are built. So we had originally they were building all their business process using both ABAP, which is like a proprietary language for SAP, right? SAP they build their this particular programming language for their own software solution, but they also have the flexibility of going with Java based language option, so they can build their application business process using Java as well. So any SAP project you take, their business logics are built either on ABAP or Java. And when it comes to Java, the way it interacts to other non-SAP system, right? It's flexible. Even till today, they are using Java. I mean, the way they have adapted is slightly different, but they have both ABAP as well as Java. So ABAP, they have built this robust programming language where it caters to all the programming needs for the business process. So even most organization uses ABAP. And now in the S4 world, right, like some of the integration with other third-party system, they have the separate business technology platform which is built on Java. I think we will talk a little bit about that in the future advanced sessions. So in terms of language, in terms of the programming language that SAP uses, these are the two options we have. We can either build the business process logic in ABAP or Java. So I think that's the end of this session. So we'll see more in our next topic. Thanks. Bye.